I don't care what I have to do. They are not going to ignore me. So I would get up, I would walk around the room, I would stand on a chair in the middle of the room, I would shout, I would run, I would scream, I would kick things, I would, if I was mad at the devil, I would kick something, and if I was happy for Jesus, I would, run around, woo! So,
I
to
imagine
me,
at 18 or 19, that would have been a lot easier to do. And, besides
I
being
did it
like
up till I quit at
47.
36. I did it up till I quit at 36. I'd like to think I still have it in me.
Okay.
But,
That would
yeah,
definitely
so-
be entertaining.
and I mean, people just come out and be like, wow, I've never really seen anybody speak like you. And I'm just like, listen, if you're not listening, I'm not speaking. So
Sure.
I think Paul said something like, I'll be a fool for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And his context was all of the troubles and trials and tribulations he'd gone through in life. But the context of the statement was, in order to reach people with this message, I'll do whatever I have to do.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper.
Well, welcome, DM. I'm glad that you're here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
I know that we had chatted a little bit before we got started, so
Yes.
you're telling me what it is that you do, which is the production of a lot of legal podcasts, and it sounds like you're well on track to do really well. So good for you, and I won't congratulate you yet.
Don't congratulate me till I've crossed the finish line, whatever I
Okay.
perceive that to be.
Got it.
You
Okay.
can cheer me on. I appreciate the
I
cheering
will
on.
cheer
I'll take
you
it as a
on.
cheering on.
Yes. So I usually start the podcast by asking a question of all of my guests, and that is if you can tell me a story of an early memory of how sound moved you.
Absolutely. So it's kind of funny. When I was probably about 5, 6 years old, so I grew up in the church life, the old school fundamental church life. I don't know if you've lived that or not. People listening, maybe there's a few that can kind of identify with it. And, we just listened to church music. We went to church 5 times a week. We didn't really watch TV, all of that sort of stuff. So I remember we had an evangelist come in, and his name was Monty Martin. And my parents I wanted his tape so bad because I just thought he was such a good singer, right? So we bought his tape, and that would be the tape that I would always make sure gets played in the car. And it got to the point where within a short amount of time, I had every song memorized off of that tape, both sides, every song front to back. Still to this day, probably 3 or 4 of them off the top of my head. I could just sing them from scratch. And it got to the point where that tape wore out. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. We started having, more kids. And then my dad, we would travel around. So now I'm about, I'm still listening to this tape. It's still my favorite tape of all time. And, it's the kind of thing that I would just sing all the time. I just love to sing. We were in church. It was obviously highly encouraged. And then they just push you up front if you can carry a tune in a bucket. So I was pushed up front quite a bit as a young person. But in my car, we would have like my baby brother, my little brother, my 2 little sisters. And we didn't really we'd have some radio that my parents could play tapes and things like that. But when we'd run out of those, they would just ask me to sing. And so I would just sing to them for sing the different church songs, the songs off this tape, just for hours and hours and hours. And I just remember thinking as a young teenager how I was able to my parents would be like, "Oh, calm down back there. You got wrestling around, kids in a van, driving for 6, 8 hours at a time." But literally I could just sit there and sing for an hour, and all my brothers and sisters just quiet, calm, just listen. And each one of them to this day could probably tell you most every song I sang. And so that I would say is probably one of my favorites because it goes back, but then it spanned and into my, teenage years. And then the impact it had on my teenage years was like, wow, my voice has such an impact and an effect, even on just my little brothers and sisters.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, sound is a universal language. So there you go. You learned your communication early. So
Exactly.
from singing, so I know that you mentioned to me the last time we spoke that you became a pastor at a really
Hmm.
early age. So what was that like?
You know, it's one of those things when you look back on it, you're like, what on earth? Like, why did they even allow me to? Like, my first church, I was 18. I was a youth pastor at 16. And I'm like, why? Like, guys my age would just like sit down on Sunday morning and for 3 hours listen to some 19-year-old kid. Like, I would never listen to some 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 18-year-old kid tell me how to live life. I'd just be like, you haven't even, you're barely out of diapers, kid, but it happened. I mean, again, that was another phase in my life where I learned the importance of using my voice differently. So singing is obviously a whole different instrument than using your voice for speaking properly.
Oh,
And
sure. They
so,
have relation though. Like they're
oh,
definitely related to
absolutely.
each other. Yeah.
Absolutely, but I think it's like French and Spanish, right? They're both Latin based,
Sure.
and you can they definitely you can see the roots of one another, but there's definitely nuance to each of them individually.
Yes.
And so getting up and learning to speak in public and things like that, I'd already done a lot of it because when I was 18, I was in college and stuff like that. But even in high school, I spoke in youth group the majority of the time. I was like the youth pastor, youth director, but more of just speaking. And then, so then when I got to that point where I was speaking, it was like really, it really wasn't anything I thought about. It was just get up, do it, talk, and but seeing like how talking in a hushed tone all of a sudden could like quiet a crowd or getting really excited, and I'm trying to control it because we're on mic now, but getting really excited and you could just see people's eyes just start to like pop a little bit. And so just using the different parts of your voice to bring across something and take people on a journey. A lot of my sermons that I would do, I like to use a very storytelling style. So instead of it being a straight, like, here's the scripture, here's what the scripture says, now you go do this. And I would do that partially, but I really loved sort of like a storytelling. I had one where when I traveled around preaching, preachers would call other preachers and say, hey, you need to have this guy do this one sermon. And I would essentially take basically, I don't know if you grew up in church or not, but there's like a story of like 10 lepers who get healed by Jesus. He gives us as an illustration or something, but only one comes back and thanks him. And so I tell the story of the time that he gets healed to everything he does until he comes back to the feet of Jesus. And I kind of tell it like are you familiar with the book Pilgrim's Progress?
No.
Okay. It's an
Sorry.
old book from like the 1700s that most
Okay.
like
Yeah.
like strict Christians know, and it's essentially
Okay.
it's an allegorical book about this guy named Christian who goes through life, and he makes it through the pit of despair, and he makes it through the city of temptation, and so I essentially tell it like that. Like his old neighbor Mister works a lot, and he's just like, yeah, I don't have time for that, and so I'd like tell the story of this man like traveling along, seeing his old friends, and them all just like not caring about what happened to him, and him going back and being like, well, I'm just going to worship at the feet of Jesus then because no one understands what I've been through. So, seeing like the impact of storytelling and our voice and all that we can do. I know personally, I can hold a room, and this is just vibes in general, understanding about 300 to 500 people I can hold in a room, and I can hold the vast majority of the people's attention. Once we get above that, I have to kind of guess whether or not I'm holding attention because you can't really feel the energy. It kind of gets above your ability to monitor it. I've spoken to, 3,000 a few times, something like that.
Sure.
And you feel like you're almost shouting into an abyss, versus like that 300 to 500, you can almost feel the energy and see whether or not people are plugged in all across the whole room.
So
And
how
so
do you keep people plugged in to what you're saying, that 300 to 500 people? Like, do you have a particular set of things that you make sure you do when you're speaking to a group like that?
not really, but like at the time, and again, it's been 10 years since I've spoken regularly in this capacity, but like
Okay.
I always had a couple of philosophies. One is if no one's listening, am I really speaking? Right. And like I don't know, again, just growing up in church, I just see people like now it'd be on their phone, but they'd be writing notes about nothingness. The kids would be playing with little games. And I'm just like, here's this guy, he's prepared, or girl or whatever, this individual who's prepared this thing that they think is very important. And then you got 80% of the congregation just like unplugged and doing their own thing. And so I was just like, you know what? I don't care what I have to do. They are not going to ignore me. So I would get up, I would walk around the room, I would stand on a chair in the middle of the room, I would shout, I would run, I would scream, I would kick things, I would, if I was mad at the devil, I would kick something, and if I was happy for Jesus, I would, run around, woo! So,
I imagine at 18 or 19, that would have been a lot easier to do, and, besides being like 47.
I did it up till I quit at 36. I'd like to think I still have it in me.
Okay.
But,
that would definitely be entertaining.
and I mean, people would just come out and be like, wow, I've never really seen anybody speak like you. And I'm just like, listen, if you're not listening, I'm not speaking. So
sure.
I think Paul said something like, I'll be a fool for Christ. Mm-hmm. And his context was all of the troubles and trials and tribulations he'd gone through in life. But the context of the statement was, in order to reach people with this message, I'll do whatever I have to do. And that was the philosophy I took into it. If I had teenagers, I could be a little more bolder. If I had, a crowd of like people that are a little older, I like to do things that would kind of really make people off kilter. Like I had this one sermon that I would do, and it was about a prophet, and this prophet, basically his message was he had to stand in front of the crowd, and they all knew he was the prophet from God. And I think it was just like, 3 minutes every day, or it was something like, it was a relatively short amount of time, but for there to be no silence. So we'd like go and stand in front of everybody and just say nothing. And then they'd be like, well, what does God want? Well, and they'd throw it at him. And his message was, God's done talking to you. You need to act on it. So I used to have a sermon that I started that way, and I would set my notes all up, and I would just kind of settle in, and I put my arms on the pulpit, and I just look at the people, and I just put like a half pleasant smile on my face. And I'd look around and I'd say nothing. And it's always the oldest lady in the church that she becomes the speaker for everybody. I remember one time I heard her say, "Did you prepare anything? Why are you just staring at us?" And then I would just go like this. I was, wait. Now I would tell them first to open to the scripture. I'd say, open to this scripture. And then I would stand there. Now, the people that open the scripture would like look down and read it and then look up at me and go, oh, I know what he's doing. But the people that wouldn't open their Bibles and read the scripture, they were just like, why is he standing here staring at us? And I want to say I would do it for like 90 seconds.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how long. Yeah.
It was just long enough. Like at about 45 seconds is when people realized like, what's going on? What's wrong? About a minute, they start to get a little irritated. And then when it gets about a minute 15, you start to get like, what's going on here? What is this? Why are we? And then finally at a minute and a half, I would read the scripture to them. And then the people that would get sort of like impatient, they would realize that they were mirroring the people in the Bible that were acting negatively. And then it was just like, it was a sermon unto itself to just stand quietly for 90 seconds in front of people. So again, just the power of sound or the lack thereof.
Or the lack thereof. Yeah, exactly. And I find it really interesting to think of that in its context. So if you're in a church doing that, then people are going to get annoyed at a certain point. If you're doing that in a comedy club, they start to laugh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just depends on where you are. Again, context is really paramount to all of that. But a fantastic early career, definitely, and certainly put you in good stead for communication later in life. But speaking of communication, you went on to sell ads, right? So you ended up
Actually, I did that in college. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been an entrepreneur since I was 14. Most every position I ever had in ministry, I paid my own bills and tied into the church that I was the pastor of. So like I could take these like poor churches in like really rough parts of town that needed a church, and I'd just be like, I'll be the pastor. And they'd be like, wait, what? Like you can put two sentences together. Most guys who say yes are like trying to be closer to the crack houses or something. I don't know, so I'm just like, no, like I'll take it and I'll work with you guys. But I had my own money, so I could do those things. And then when I started, when I started selling ads, and maps, magnets, posters, magazines. This was like the late 90s, mid to late 90s. I realized like, wow, there's a lot of money in this. And not only is there money in this, but in a way you're helping these businesses. If you're not ripping them off and you're really producing the product and it's a good thing, then like you're helping these companies. And so I was like, this is something I can feel good about, yet make pretty good money and take care of me and mine, instead of like, because I lived in a house, my dad usually kept like part-time jobs and my mom kept like a full-time job. And my dad also did ministry. I wanted it to be where I made enough money where we lived comfortably and I did ministry. And then I was able to pretty much do that my entire career. But that's what I started. I had my first business at 14, 18 is when I started another business. 20, I started a company, and I retired in about a year, and I spent 4 or 5 years living back and forth in Romania, and I was doing evangelist work here and there. And so I think it was an easy, I've never had a problem talking to people, sales, groups, it's never bothered me.
That's fantastic.
The only thing I've ever had nerves about when it comes to sound is when I was in church, we were so concerned about not being vain and bringing glory to ourselves in our singing that we weren't really allowed to sing the way that I like to sing, because I kind of portion of my life grew up in the Black community. And so like, I like to say I have a little bit of soul. And so like, but like in our movement, it was like you couldn't do anything but just straight sing, oh, 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 that sort of singing. And whereas I kind of like more soulful music. So I would get up and I would be nervous because I would essentially have to sing out of my element. So I didn't feel like I was expressing myself, although I was. It's like being able to, it's like you're in 100-yard dash and you're against like all of your competition and you're just like skipping. You're like, I know I can do a lot faster than this, and I know that I can keep up with all these people, but I'm only allowed to skip. That's
It's
kind of
funny.
how I felt.
It's funny because I relate this to there is a segment of voiceover that will ask you to do singing. And often when they're doing singing on a commercial, they want you to sing badly.
Really?
Yeah, because it's supposed to be humorous or something like that, right? So if they want it to be humorous, or they just want it to be somebody maybe in the shower, or somebody who is like, doing something in the kitchen and they're semi-distracted or whatever, right? But I'm a singer. And so when they ask me to do this, I can't do it. It's hard.
Can you go to karaoke?
I do, but I don't dial it back.
No, I don't either, but I don't like going to karaoke.
Yeah.
Not because, like, I like it when I get to sing.
Yeah.
But, people get up there and they're just like,
yeah.
And you're just like, oh,
part of it is
life.
You have to listen to the people who are just very happy about it.
Yes. And I love my wife, but that's her style.
Yes.
She's just like, she gets up and sings like Janis Joplin or Joan Jett or whatever. And she's just like, and I'm like, baby. She's like, how'd I do? I'm like, I love you so much.
That's fun though. I mean, I can take that and have fun with it just because
I could take it for a little bit, but it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard. After like I can go to karaoke like an hour and a half and sing twice.
Yeah.
But for the people who want to go there for 3-4 hours and listen to just like people get drunker and drunker and stupider, and then now we got to break out the, nasty booty songs from the early 2000s and and I've got to pretend that I can rap because I knew this song when I was a kid, and it's like you I don't pretend like I can rap. Why are you pretending like we can't rap? Like,
it's it can get rowdy and it can get less than melodious, let's say.
Yes. Yes.
So I get it. But moving on to communication again in sound, you've moved on to podcasting for lawyers now. So how did that come about?
Well, I've worked with attorneys in marketing for about 20 years of my career. That's been my niche specialty. And I've had several. I've had social agency. I've had SEO companies. Like I said, I've just been a serial entrepreneur. I've had 3 companies.
Why lawyers? I have to ask.
Yeah, and that's the question everybody asks.
Yeah.
For me, lawyers act in logic instead of emotion. And so although they're tough people and rather condescending, if you can match them in their level and they perceive that your intelligence is equal to theirs, and they perceive that you know what you're talking about just as much as they know what they're talking about when it comes to law, then you can have although at times tense, you can have a conversation that I don't have to use sales tactics. I don't have to act like I'm their new best friend. I don't have to look for things in the background and pretend that, oh, look at that. I see that you've got a candle on your in the back of your thing. I really love candles. You must like candles. Like, we should be best friends. Like, we both like candles.
That
and
happens on
like,
LinkedIn every day.
yeah. It's just like, it's so disingenuous to me. But like with attorneys, I just start off, I'm like, listen, we scheduled 30 minutes for this. I'm going to try to get it done in 20. I'm not going to act like I'm your new best friend. We're going to get right into this. Don't hesitate to ask me any questions along the way. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to just jump straight into our meeting. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, that's great. Then we jump in. And so you can use logic and they don't get emotional. So you can just be like, okay, I hear your point, but what about this? What about this? And have you considered this? And if you're logical, you can bring them to a conclusion where they're like, you know what? You're right. That makes sense. Let's give it a try. Whereas I found with blue collar type business owners, they tend to be more emotional. And I know I'm stereotyping. I'm not saying every blue collar workers, but like typically if you call a roofer and he's like, nah, I'm not interested. And you're like, well, have you considered this? He's like, F you. How dare you try to tell me to run my business? You know what I mean? Whereas with a lawyer,
Ouch.
yeah, I mean, it's just, and again, you have to be willing to fight that game. And I've fought the game and I've won it, but I
think it would depend on the
deal with
roofer,
lawyers.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's why lawyers, they act in logic. And if you come in at their level, you can have a good, respectful conversation with them. That's what I've learned through the years.
Okay.
If you come in weak, though, they will steal your lunch money and laugh at you.
Oh yeah. I can get that. Yeah. So have you had a client of yours that then changed their business or their approach with clients, or anything happen after they decided to do a podcast with you?
Well,
How is it
I think
improved is what I mean.
I think what you need to understand is they don't come on my podcast. What we do is we create their podcast for them.
Yeah. That's what I was referring to. So
yes,
when you
okay.
created a podcast for them,
yes,
how did that change their business?
I mean, we've seen definitely success. Like, for example, I mean, 2 home runs for us, which is kind of like serendipitous timing, but at the same time, like, so we have one guy who has a show that he deals with FDA imports. And I mean, who doesn't want to know what's going on with imports and tariffs right now? We have another guy who is a federal employee. Like, basically, if you get fired and you're a federal employee, he helps you with like fair firing and all of that.
And that's a lot needed right now too.
Again, another hot button issue.
Oof.
But what made the difference was they went from being on a local platform and a referral base with our marketing. All of a sudden, when this stuff started getting searched, they jumped straight up to the top, and now they're getting nationwide. Just, so it's increased where they're just like, wow, now I'm picking clients.
So their reach has increased. Okay.
Yes, the reach has increased, but what we teach our clients is it's not about the reach, it's about reaching more of your ideal client profile. So if you have 50,000 downloads or views of a show, but they're all over the world and no one calls you, it's not nearly as valuable as if you have 50 and 10 people 50 people locally, 10 of them call you and 6 of them hire you. That is infinite. So 50 could be infinitely more valuable than 50,000. And so that's what we, try to help them understand is you're producing very niche content. But if anybody consumes your content, it's because they want to, and chances are they need you. So that's where we see growth with all of our clients is, they answer this question, somebody finds it, then they call them, hey, I saw your show, I was watching your podcast, and you answered all the questions about like, what happens to a second home during a divorce and what happens to a boat? Because we've got a lot of toys and we're looking at a divorce. Is there a way for me to keep my boat? Like, that sort of stuff. That's what our clients get is just more of their ideal clients.
Sure. And sound-wise, is there a particular podcast that you've worked on that you've enjoyed a lot, or any that stick out in your mind?
I have one guy who has basically we do a podcast with him, and then he went and made his own second podcast, but then he's also started bringing on guests because a lot of our clients. They just come on the show themselves, and then our host asks them the questions. And so he started bringing on clients, and he's really started doing a lot with his show. He's really starting to teach. He's understanding the importance of content marketing being like an 80-20, not like a 50-50. It's not 50% sell your product, 50% give them something that makes them want to buy your product. It's like 80% value, 20%, hey, by the way, if you want to buy, this is who I am and what I do. And he's really plugged into that. And because of that, he's building relationships, seeing growth, and he's seeing a lot happen with his podcast.
Yeah, good for him. Yeah. So do any of your podcasts have like intros and outros?
They all have intros and outros.
Okay.
We build them. We use skins as well with like, bottom thirds and then their logo and branding on it. So it kind of looks like an MSNBC kind of look and feel, like with the talking heads.
So you're doing video as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Video is probably our most crucial part of this, honestly, because we can make reels. We can make stuff out of it and repurpose it. And, I gave this illustration on a presentation the other day because a guy tried to tell me that, we'd probably only need to market the first 5 episodes. Then after that, he wouldn't want any marketing. And I was like, every existing business in the world markets. And then I gave the illustration, and I didn't know this. I thought everybody had Chick-fil-A in their mall, but apparently not everybody has Chick-fil-A in their mall. So if you don't have Chick-fil-A in your mall, or if you especially don't know what Chick-fil-A is, first of all, Google it. It's just the best chicken sandwich in the world, regardless of your politics. So that being said, Chick-fil-A traditionally has been set up in the mall where I'm from in the Midwest. And when you walk through that food court, there's usually that like person that's standing there with a tray of chicken nuggets with a toothpick in them, and they're handing that chicken nugget out to you, right? And so marketing is like that chicken nugget. It's not the whole thing, but they taste it and it makes them want to go, oh, let's have that. Oh man, that was good. Yeah, I just remembered how awesome Chick-fil-A sandwiches are, even though I've had them, 3 times a week for the past 2 years. I need a 4th time this week. So yeah, I mean, we use the marketing to be able to from the video. And so that just creates a lot of opportunities for us to market our clients into their database of people and into our ever-expanding database of people that are following us.
Mm-hmm. So you're giving them little taste tests, basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.